Hey, good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. It is now Monday, March 16th, 2020, and what a world we live in now just between the last update that I have done and today. Just a week ago, how things have changed. It is unbelievable, and I'm not going to ignore it. You know, it's part of my world as well. Certainly not going to dwell on it. It's not going to be a big part of what we talk about here, but I'm not going to ignore it either. It certainly is a changed world for all of us, and that means that this kind of information, weather, other news, etc., but especially weather, is going to become very important and even more so in our lives because this whole coronavirus, SARS-2, whatever people are calling it these days, is a huge distraction, and rightfully so, from other things that are going on. And we have severe weather. The northern hemisphere is getting ready to enter spring. Southern hemisphere will go into autumn and eventually winter. And, you know, we got to be on top of this. We can't let the weather sneak up on us and become secondary, because weather can turn against us. And we got to be, on top and make sure that we are aware and prepared. Everybody should be prepared. I mean, after all, it seems like the entire country has bought up enough supplies to handle a couple of weeks' worth of blizzards and hurricanes and whatever else could be thrown at us. So maybe we are more prepared than ever before. But, even with the materialistic things that we purchase to get ready for a natural disaster, you still have to be mentally prepared, and you got to make sure that you're aware of what is coming. So here I am, still doing my job. Hey, you know what? I work at home and have worked at home since the moment I started my career more than 25 years ago. So this is the perfect fit for me. I'll keep on rolling as best I can. All right, so let's start off today's look at what's going on globally with sea surface temperature anomalies, departures from the norm or the average, whichever way you want to look at it. And out here in the tropical Pacific, this is the big area that we're going to really watch over the coming weeks as we anticipate the development of cold neutral conditions, and then maybe La Nina. But I'm not as concerned about a La Nina forming as I am the fact that we will have the absence, and that is the clue here, the big key here, the absence of El Nino in this part of the world. And the reason that is important, that area that I have circled there in white, when it is abnormally warm, water temperature-wise, at the surface of the Pacific there, the tropical Pacific, you get a lot of rising motion, and that air generally spreads out and sinks, creates westerly winds over here in the Atlantic basin on this side, and you tend to chop off tropical waves that are coming from east to west across the Atlantic basin. And the bottom line is an El Nino usually shuts the door on an active hurricane season in the Atlantic. It doesn't mean that there will be no hurricanes. We just need to look at past years. You've probably already heard about them. You know what I'm talking about. That El Nino doesn't mean no hurricanes, but it certainly helps to put the kibosh on a lot of hurricanes developing. And so logic would dictate then that in the absence of El Nino in the tropical Pacific, that the Atlantic hurricane season would at least have a chance to be busier than normal. And it looks like that's what could happen. We don't know for sure, but that's the stage that's being set. So this area we will be watching closely. Right now still neutral to warm neutral, but it's shifting pretty quickly. I'll show you some more evidence of that in a moment. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic basin, the main development region over here, especially the eastern parts of it, quite a bit warmer than the long-term average. Running at least 1/4 degree Celsius according to the CDAS data. That's a particular satellite sea surface temperature data set. That this area all through here is at least 1/4 degree Celsius or warmer. And again, I've talked about this before. If you took my glass of water here that I'm enjoying, it's almost all gone. The pollen is going to be real interesting to deal with as we mix it up with all this virus stuff. The allergy season, it usually attacks me pretty good. I get sniffly and water-eyed, and eventually I lose my voice. Anyhow, when my glass was full earlier, when I was starting to put all my stuff together, If I raised the temperature of this glass of water a quarter of a degree Celsius, I wouldn't notice the difference. But there's energy in that increase in water temperature. And then this very small glass, it's negligible. You know what I mean? But in the ocean, scattered across and covering thousands of miles, not only of aerial coverage, you know, like the surface, but also that warm water has depth. That extra quarter of a degree is a lot of energy. It's so much that I probably couldn't even explain it to you, because that's beyond my pay grade as a geographer and as an earth scientist. I don't know how to explain the mechanics and the physics of it, but you just got to trust me that a quarter of a degree doesn't sound like much, but it is significant. And when you talk about a degree Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius, which some of these anomalies right here off the coast of Africa are in that range, then you talk about ridiculous amounts of energy. Trying to get the webcam to go back. There we go. Disappear, Mark. That's a lot of extra energy. And the Atlantic as a whole is warmer than the long-term average. And as I said, the development of La Nina, sorry, I have to focus. The development of La Nina is possible. And if we look at the subsurface chart here, so this is the surface. This is what it would look like if we took a slice sort of through right down this area right here. If we just took a slice right through there and looked in the vertical. This is all horizontal, so this is the vertical, right? Oh, come on. Right there. So right now we still have at the surface, you know, and then about 150 meters deep, a pretty large pool of subsurface to surface warmth. However, in the eastern Pacific, we're starting to see a change, and I better change my color so we can see this better. Let's use green today. Starting to see a change with cold anomalies reaching the surface from the depths down here, and some of these cold anomalies are several degrees Celsius below average. And then we have a huge expanding area of negative anomalies in the western Pacific that will eventually erode all of this away. The climate models are seeing it, including the Euro, the ECMWF, which is typically very aggressive. Well, wouldn't say very aggressive, but it tends to be on the warm side for El Nino. And just to give you a glance at some of the models here off of the Bureau of Meteorology page from almost at the University of Australia. That was in my brain. I almost said it. I did say it. But from the Bureau of Meteorology down in Australia, here's an example like the CFS V2. It's definitely calling for La Nina conditions in the Nino 3-4 region of the tropical Pacific. And other models are following suit as well. The Access model here from the Bureau of Meteorology itself. Come on, populate. Going to cold neutral. They have a slightly different qualification for El Nino and La Nina. It's 0.8 positive or 0.8 negative to meet those thresholds respectively. But you can see generally, you know, that down, 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 everything goes. So all of this leads me to believe that in the coming weeks here, when Dr. Phil Klotzbach and his team, Phil, of course, is the lead author from Colorado State University, when they released their quantitative forecast in early April, that my guess is that he will be calling for a slightly above average season. I think it's too early to say that it will be significantly above average. I mean, there's just not enough data, I guess. We'll just have to wait and see what he says. That being said, we're not going to be able to get that forecast in person. I say we, my colleagues and I, because the National Tropical Weather Conference in South Padre Island has been canceled in terms of being in person. And so that's a bummer. I mean, we know why that it has to be that way, and that's where we were going to hear from Dr. Klotzbach. So he'll publish his work, and he'll tweet it, and it'll be all over social media, believe me, because it's probably going to be for an active season, you know, in whatever terms that means. Will it be hyperactive, very active? We don't know. It's still March, you know, it's only middle March, but the data is suggesting with the absence of El Nino, that's a big clue right there, and the warming of the Atlantic, and a lot of the climate models are indicating that the North Atlantic will continue to warm, abnormally so. It is setting up to be the potential for a very busy season ahead as we look forward. And I say look forward, that just means looking ahead, not like it's a good thing, to the Atlantic hurricane season. So we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. And I just wanted to point out a couple things. Again, most of the energy here still in the mid to, let's get a different color. Let's use blue. Most of the energy is still up here in the high latitudes, but a little bit of a swirly right in here in the vicinity of the islands. You see that? If you look real close right there, counterclockwise turning. Water temperatures just a little bit too cool. And the main thing is there's just not enough instability down there. But yeah, right in here, definitely some counterclockwise turning just to the northeast of the islands. And if this were August, this would be filled with convection, and we'd be a little bit concerned that this might try to develop. But by and large, the weather pattern, at least for now, not too bothersome. Certainly down in the tropics, nothing really going on. Boy, you can really see the strong westerly winds that cut across the tropical Atlantic at this time of year, and it takes a few months for all of this energy to shift north. The jet stream, etc., will shift north, and then we start to look for tropical waves down here. We're about 76 days away from the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season, so it won't be long that we will really start to watch different features such as the Madden-Julian oscillation, when would the window open for the first development chances. That's not too far away, probably a couple of weeks from now, and then we can start looking at the 30 and 45-day upward motion forecasts, and we will be relying on people like Ben Knoll, our good buddy from New Zealand. He has developed incredible maps over the years, and we can look at that. But we're not there yet, okay? One thing at a time. Got enough to deal with already, but don't want to be too alarmist. But we cannot ignore the weather. Max Mayfield, good friend of mine from former National Hurricane Center director years, told me a long time ago, right after the September 11th attacks, he said the hurricanes are not going to stop just because we're in a war on terror. And the same thing is true against this pandemic. The virus and the hurricanes, they don't know each other. Okay? And one can exist with or without the other, and we have to make sure we stay focused on the rest of the goings-on in the world. All right, so anyhow, back at the topic at hand, this, my friends, is what that little swirly looks like. A little bit of spin in the atmosphere. But with that energy showing up there, there's just not enough instability, so there's not much in the way of showers and thunderstorms with it. But there is some energy there. It's interesting to see that little piece of energy just off the southeast coast. But again, strong upper level winds, cool sea surface temperatures relative to where they're heading. I mean, they get into the mid and upper 80s in some areas for hurricane season. We're not there yet, but it's coming. So I mentioned Dr. Klotzbach. His initial quantitative forecast comes out, like I said, the early part of April. But over at Weather Bell, Joe Bastardi at Weather Bell has issued a forecast, and I went over to Storm 2K, and they talk about it there in the forecast, expert forecast for the 2020 hurricane season thread. And this is a great community too, storm2k.org, been around a long time. A lot of good, sensible, knowledgeable people without any BS or scare tactics. And they just post what's up. So here's what Joe was saying. This post right here, you can see that he's looking at 14 to 20 named storms, 7 to 11 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 majors with an accumulated cyclone energy. The amount of energy produced by all those hurricanes, anywhere from 145 to 195. So that's one person's early look. That's Joe Bastardi and I guess his cohorts over there at the Weather Bell forecast group, whatever they're called. So we'll see. We'll see what Dr. Klotzbach says when his comes out in early April, but that's a little bit of a glance at a look ahead right there. And it's interesting, Joe says there are many similarities to some notable hyperactive seasons. Yep, there are. We can't ignore that. Some of the early sea surface temperature analogs, 2004, 2005, 2010 have popped up from time to time. just based on sea surface temperature analogs only. That means sea surface temperatures are similar to or analogous to other sea surface temperatures in the past. Which ones? 04, 05, 2010, 07 was in there, even 2013 at one point, and it shifts around, but whatever. We'll know more as time goes on. But again, it's getting there. We're 76 days away. We have to start thinking about it, even with everything else that's going on. Hey, at least lower 48 weather is not too bad, except out here. Whoops, drawing on the thing with white. That doesn't show up too well, does it? California, you know, this is a good thing. You get miserable weather, but you need the snowpack, and you need the fresh water that's contained in that snowpack. So several feet of snow for the Sierra Nevada is, well, it's dangerous if you don't, use common sense. But otherwise, it's a good thing for your snowpack and your water supply. Look at Hawaii. Flood and severe thunderstorm. There's what do they call it? A Kahuna low or something like that. There's a low pressure area just to the west of Hawaii, non-tropical in nature, but it's delivering some nasty weather to the Hawaiian Islands. Just so you know, looking at lower 48 and elsewhere weather, Hawaii is not necessarily the lower 48 because it's not part of the contiguous United States, but it certainly is one of the 50 states, duh. So there you go. It's on this map, so we'll talk about it. But the rest of the country, except for these little green patches through the Mississippi River Valley, and those are flood warnings from all the spring and winter rains we've had, everything else is pretty calm for now. However, there's always a however, this area through here is getting ready to light up as we head deeper into, I should say, the severe weather season. So as we look at lower 48 weather continuing on, today not too bad, just a marginal risk in those green areas, including out west. Interesting, just some random thunderstorms here and there. But tomorrow, the day 2 outlook, painting a slight risk in the western parts of Texas. Not too much in the way of tornadoes overall, and we can see that reflected here, only 2%. But the wind, is getting on up there, 15%, and then the hail, 15%. If you had a 15% chance of winning $1,000, you'd really probably go for it, wouldn't you? And so that's one way to look at it. 15% is not low, okay? That's enough that people in this area, at least it's fairly sparsely populated, but as it shows, you still have Lubbock, Abilene, Midland, Odessa, San Angelo, and vicinity, and even in the 5% area, up to Amarillo, Wichita Falls, etc. So we got to pay attention to all of this. Back to categorical, and then the day 3 outlook, this will stretch out to Wednesday. Again, West Texas up into southwest Oklahoma, and that includes areas now in this situation close to Oklahoma City, Lubbock, Abilene, Norman, Wichita Falls, all the way to Dallas in the marginal. And again, looking at the probabilistic, just overall severe weather, 15% chance of a severe thunderstorm occurring, 25 miles severe weather of a particular point. So again, 15%, that's not too shabby. Not quite time for me to jump in a rental and drive out here and set up equipment. I would love to do that. That time is coming, but it's not time just yet. I'm going to wait until we get a moderate, and it's going to be in this area somewhere in here that I will go for it. And then we got to wait and see. Hopefully there won't be any travel restrictions that I wouldn't be allowed to do that. But again, we got to face these new realities we're facing and dealing with. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. But I do fully intend to get out here when we get a moderate risk of severe weather in this area and placing several cameras out here and see what we get. Observe severe weather, study its impacts from a different perspective than the traditional chasing by vehicle and looking through the windshield. I'll talk about it more later. I've talked about it a little bit if you paid attention to these videos and you've been watching them over the last couple of years. This has been sort of a dream of mine, and thanks to Patreon and our supporters here, this is a good way to segue into this. I think I'll be able to do so. We just got to pick the right time. So speaking of Patreon, a couple of big announcements here. First of all, this is going to be the go-to way that we get most of our live in-the-field coverage to you all. It is crowd-funded, supported by people like you. And when hurricane season ramps up, when we deploy our cameras, we put our weather stations out there, all of that will be available through Patreon. And you got the different tiers here. It starts at $1 a month just to support the basics of what we do. You get our podcast, access to our entire library of documentaries, and any posts that I make. This is kind of like our own little microcosm of social media wrapped up here right on Patreon, and you can get all of that just for $1 a month. At $10 a month, you have all of that, plus the access to all of our live streams, everything that we were doing in our app, Hurricane Impact, which we no longer produce. And I know it's like, what? Nope, the app was just too expensive to keep up with, and it's actually better just to aggregate everything right here on Patreon and use their app. And it's actually a lot easier for me to do, and I'd rather pay Patreon 10% off the top to maintain their infrastructure, which has a lot better infrastructure that I could do in my app, and I can deliver nearly the same quality stuff through Patreon. And those of you that have been on Patreon for the last year or more, you know what I'm talking about. And then at $25 a month, something really, really cool that I just announced today in a message to our patrons, the $25 level and up has that very interesting thing. See where it says there, paper tracking map. What is that? Scroll down, look at my latest post. That's it. I started my career 25 years ago producing hurricane tracking maps. And they were big ones, not those little placemat size ones. They were like, I should have brought one in here, darn it. They were large. And over the years, since computers and apps and everything have kind of made paper tracking old school in the way of the dinosaur, I thought, you know what, this year, let's bring back the paper tracking map. So I am very excited to announce that as part of our $25 and up patronage, I'm going to send you one of these tracking maps. For our current patrons and anybody that signs up, from here on out, you will get one. I will also provide a link in a future update on our website, a future discussion here, where you can buy one of these, excuse me, a la carte for $20 flat rate, and you'll have a real paper tracking chart, map and chart, 24 by 18 inches, full color. And I literally designed that map. That is my hand-drawn map that I created probably 15 years ago or something like that, maybe longer, in Adobe Illustrator. I did all of those place names on there, and this is what I used to produce by the hundreds of thousands through TV, radio. I did these for Lowe's home improvement stores, Harris Teeter, Farm Fresh. Trying to think who else I did these for. And anyway, it's time to bring back the old school way of tracking, and this will be the official 2020 hurricane tracking map from HurricaneTrack.com. So it'll be included in our $25 level of patronage on Patreon. And then I'll provide a link where if you just, can't really become part of Patreon, I understand, but you still want to get a map, we'll make sure that you can do so. All right? So there you go. Some exciting things ahead. By the way, for our patrons, today I will be uploading the third episode in the Hurricane Highway series. That's different from our podcast. The podcast is called Stories from the Hurricane Highway. That's an audio podcast, and we're up to the year 2004. But the TV type series that I'm doing, called the Hurricane Highway, it's a look back at the 2019 hurricane season, but it's a different format than the old Tracking the Hurricanes movies that I did. It's episodic. First of all, they're episodes instead of one long 2-hour movie, and it's just a different style. You'll just have to see it to understand. So any of our current patrons, it doesn't matter what tier you are patroning at, is that a word? Supporting me at, there's the allergies. It doesn't matter what level, you get that access there. So be sure to look for that this afternoon. Hurricane Barry is episode 3, and it's pretty good considering Barry was not a big impact like Michael or something. I think I made a lot out of that episode. It's got a lot of archival stuff in it, You'll just have to see. So that's dropping early this evening on Patreon on our HurricaneTrack Insider site. I look forward to sharing that with you there. All right. So as I sign off, just reiterating again, this is unusual, uncharted, very bizarre. It's like we're living the world of the movie Contagion in real life. And I don't mean that to sound funny at all. It's literally like that's what's happening. We're seeing a movie unfold in front of our very lives. And it is stressful. It is difficult. It is going to become more difficult. But as long as we have the internet and social media, and everybody keeps their humanity, be kind to each other, and just don't completely lose our you-know-what, we can get through this. And I fully intend to be here, and unless I get sick or something, I mean, of course, and hopefully that won't happen, but I'll take the necessary precautions and go to the hospital if I have to. But let's just hope that doesn't happen. Hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody. And in fact, that's how you're going to know that these social distancing measures worked, is if you don't know anybody that got sick. That means it worked. I think that's a lot better than the alternative, than we all know 9 people that died. Seriously. So let's be positive. I'll be here, and we'll do this once a week, maybe more. Maybe we'll talk about it more just to give you a distraction. Maybe I'll go back and look at some old hurricanes or something. We'll figure something out. We'll get through this. But for real, people, 76 days until the official start of the season. Things can happen earlier than that. You never know. We're not going to be alarmist about it, but we're not going to ignore hurricanes either, because I guarantee you, they're not going to ignore us. They don't know we are here. They are a part of nature, and we have to make sure that we stay on top of it, and we are ready, both from a mental and a physically prepared standpoint. All right? All right, I'll do my part. I'm looking forward to you all doing yours by staying tuned and being ready. And with that being said, as always, thank you for tuning in from whatever device you happen to be doing so from. I don't know why I took my webcam off and disappeared. Let me do it this way real quick. There we go. So thank you. It's just weird. See, it's getting to me already. I do appreciate you tuning in. It's awesome to have you there on the other side of your computer screen, your smartphone, your Tesla. Some people watch these in their Tesla. They really do. It's a true story. I appreciate it very much. I am Mark Sudduth. Now I can sign off. For HurricaneTrack.com. I'll be back with you next week, if not sooner.